Welcome to another edition of Building Tech Talk with our resident experts. We have Scott Jenkins and Dr. Doug Brown from ZS2 Technologies, and we have a repeat guest for the first time in the history of the podcast. We have Stephen Harpur of Progressive Planet, CEO of Progressive Planet, joining us once again. It's a little bit of a different setup than last time. We were in a industrial zone last time we chatted with you.
The comminution plant.
Yeah,
that's right. And I was just wondering, where do I get the check mailed for my appearance fee for this? As the first repeat guest, has my team talked to you about signing a new contract?
We're in discussions. They're stalled, but hopefully we can continue talking. But we also have some exciting news from Progressive Planet as of today. We have Pause Glass news. What's Pause Glass?
So we have spent 2 years and a lot of money to develop Pause Glass SEM, which is a blend of post-consumer glass and natural pozzolan from our Z1 natural pozzolan quarry in Cache Creek, BC. The reality is that natural pozzolan occurs on the west coast of the USA and Canada, and there are very few deposits of natural pozzolan on the eastern seaboard. So if we wanted to develop a product for use on the eastern seaboard that could be economically viable, we needed to develop a product that met all the performance specifications but could just use post-consumer glass. And we were incredibly excited to announce this morning that we passed the most crucial test for using glass only in concrete, which is ASR, or alkali silica reactivity, or known in layman's terms, concrete cancer. And we just did extremely well in passing those tests, as well as increasing the compressive strength, the reactivity of the glass. So we made stronger cement with our proprietary treated Pause Glass 100G, and we passed the concrete cancer or ASR tests in flying colors. I could not be more proud of our team. And the Pause Glass 100G references 100% glass. So our Pause Glass SEM is a blend of natural pozzolan and post-consumer glass. Our Pause Glass 100G is strictly post-consumer glass, and we're very excited.
So that's taking basically recycled material and making better cement out of it. I'm a big fan of the layman's terms that you talked about, so I'm trying to bring it back to that. So
we make a phenomenal cement powder using glass only, and the reduction of the carbon footprint when you replace on a weight for weight basis Portland cement with glass powder is very large. So it's a really big deal.
Yeah, everything we've done with all the work, and Dr. Doug here working closely with the team at Progressive Planet, has been not about making a small incremental change, which we also need throughout the construction industry with these materials, especially with cement, but it's largely been about what I would classify as, and what you've accomplished, and today was sort of the big milestone, tectonic change. This is a big leap forward in reducing the CO2 footprint, but also, and I think we'll want to talk about it today, and Doug might want to comment on this, improving the performance. It's not just replacement. I think that'd be fair, right?
Absolutely. Yeah, this is a big deal. I mean, cement industry has looked at using glass before and essentially abandoned it. And the fact that you've come up with a process now, I'm super interested if you would share, some of how you did it without giving away the farm, so to speak. But this is a big deal.
It's a very big deal. I am going to choose to be very broad in my descriptions of what we do because of patent applications. And we do not want to disclose our IP or our trade secrets. But
you'll tell us after the podcast, right?
Yeah,
maybe.
You've got NDAs, so we'll consider that. What I think, to your point about tectonic, the word that I like to use is disruptive. Now, this Tech Talk is hosted by ZS2, which to me is the epitome of a disruptive solution provider. And we are a disruptive solution provider. We may make big cement companies uncomfortable because we're trying to do things differently And for the last, over a century, we weren't looking at the carbon footprint, the cumulative increase in the amount of CO2 in the air. In 1900, we had 300 parts per million of CO2 in the air. In May of 2021, we measured at 420. So 120 parts on 300 is a 40% increase. So in 120 years, we have increased the concentration of CO2 in the atmosphere by 40%. That's monstrous. We can't just stop excess emissions. We now have to start pulling this material out of the air. We need to reverse the damage we've done. And a big part of developing these alternative cementing materials is that they replace the production of Portland on a weight-for-weight basis. And it's well-established science that making 1 ton of Portland cement makes 1 ton of CO2. And that CO2 is all coming from under the ground. We're taking rocks from out of the ground and off-gassing CO2 at a rate of 44% of their weight, and we're burning hydrocarbons to make the huge amount of heat to create that off-gassing. So the production of Portland cement, you burn huge amounts of carbon and you off-gas carbon from rocks.
It's a double whammy.
It's a double whammy.
Double whammy.
And, for the last 50 years, oil has been in the crosshairs of the environmental community, and they have many valid points, and I'm not here to defend big oil. But I will say that the cement industry is now getting a focus on its carbon footprint like never before. I'm not sure if I referenced this in our first Tech Talk, but fund managers managing about $2 trillion wrote a letter to the 5 largest cement companies in the world in 2019 saying, we will not fund your expansion unless you change your carbon emission practices. And I'm paraphrasing a letter, but the sentiments are there. So we're trying to do our small part. Cement is such a huge industry. So you have the capacity to make change by changing this industry. And we're incredibly enthused about both PosGlass SEM and then PosGlass 100G for areas where we can only source post-consumer glass and not source natural porcelain.
But if, from what obviously, we've learned a lot in our partnership with Progressive Planet and getting to know Stephen over the last few years, what I think why this is so different is you touched on it in your opening remarks, is that the zeolite, which Progressive Planet is using and developing products with, is available in the Western United States, Western Canada, and certain deposits, but not on the Eastern Seaboard. But post-consumer recycled glass is everywhere in the world. So if we actually want to think blue sky in terms of the technology that you're developing, what you've announced today, this is deployable worldwide to help an industry, the cement industry, and Doug will correct me if I'm wrong or maybe chime in here in terms of its contribution to greenhouse gases and how much of it is used worldwide.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the cement industry, I heard a staggering fact the other day that if it was a country, it would be the 3rd largest emitter globally, only behind the US and China.
It's incredible.
It's a staggering amount of CO2. And I'm actually curious, Steve, when I think about the 3 R's, reduce, reuse, recycle, if I'm a consumer of, say, a glass bottle, and then I'm taking it to the recycling depot and then they're processing it, is that the type of glass we're talking about? And could you speak to like the CO2 benefit of what you're proposing versus me just using the same sort of glass container twice, so to speak?
For sure. Very good question. So when we talk about replacing Portland cement on a weight-for-weight basis, because 1 ton of Portland generates 1 ton of human-caused CO2, any replacement saves that amount of CO2 by not creating that Portland cement. So when you take glass and you recycle it, and you use that glass cutlet to make more glass, the industry has defined a carbon footprint that recycling glass to make more glass saves about 100 kilos per ton. When you replace Portland, it's a 1-for-1. So there's 10 times the reduction of a carbon footprint to use glass to replace Portland, approximately 10 times, versus simply using that glass to make more glass.
Wow.
The other thing that we need to consider is that when you take glass and you recycle it, the main other use for recycled glass is to make a amorphous or crystalline silica-free sandblasting media. The problem with that is that you're only then using the product twice. So your container is used once, it goes through recycling, the glass is made into a sandblast media, that media is used once, and then it goes to landfill. So now you've got 2 use and landfill, which is better than 1 use and landfill. But when you take glass and you make pozzolanic concrete, which is the same concrete that the Romans made, and the same concrete which the Pantheon is made from and is still standing with no rebar at 950 years of age, you make a uber strong, uber tough concrete that lasts for a very long time. So we're not aware of any other use for glass that has anything close to the impact of reducing the carbon footprint of the glass and creating a virgin product. It just makes more sense to us to use it in replacing Portland cement than any other use. And if someone would explain to me another use where it has a even better mitigation of a carbon footprint, I'd love to hear about it.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not aware of any.
Wow.
Yeah, that's impressive.
So right now, if somebody's looking to lower their carbon or their embodied carbon in a project or their carbon footprint, and they want to source low carbon cement, where do they go right now? Are people lining up for your technology, or is there a source that they can go to, or is this still very early on in the commercialization?
We're
process?
early on. I would say stay tuned, and we will communicate with our investor base and the marketplace. We have a track record of moving fast and not wasting time, and we understand that we need to procure a long-term steady supply of post-consumer glass, and I suggest you stay tuned.
I think there's a twinkle in his eye when he says that.
I'm getting
Yeah.
that. I feel like we're just going to finish this
Yeah.
podcast, and then
For the regulatory authorities, I think that was well spoken.
I suggest our listeners, after they listen to this, maybe Google a little bit, because there's probably some news right as we speak.
So I appreciate very much the opportunity to discuss this whole PosGlass 100G. We're very excited. Again, to your point, it's generated in every major market. And one of the components of reducing the embodied carbon in building materials is to make those building materials as close to where they're consumed. So concrete is consumed, the vast majority of concrete is consumed in urban centers. The vast majority of glass is recycled in urban centers. So having distributed production of PosGlass 100G, to me, would be a very good concept. So ultimately, we need to figure out how to build a commercial plant to optimize the production of PosGlass 100G, to minimize its cost, confirm that it's economic on a commercial basis, and then I think ultimately we see a licensing play. We can't be in every city and manage every ton of glass. So we think that a realistic strategy is to build a flagship facility, and then we would view licensing this technology to glass processors in cities as a logical growth strategy.
Steve, could you speak to the disruption of a solution like this? Are you going to be taking glass potentially from people who would want to make more glass with recycled glass? Is there a stockpile of what you're talking about? Are municipalities recycling enough of this to meet the scale of something like cement?
There is currently more post-consumer glass generated than can be consumed as a sandblasting media. There are size restrictions when you make glass cutlet. to make more glass. There are size restrictions on powders. So there are waste glass powders generated all over North America that are thrown out. We want those powders. So we've been to various glass processing facilities and observed the significant amount of glass that is not consumed after processing based on it being too small. That's exactly the material
Perfect
that we
for
like to
cement.
see. We have seen a history, even in pozzolans that are used, where granular pozzolans are produced for industry. Powders are a waste source, and we try to monetize waste. It's been what we've been trying to do for a long time now.
So you're essentially taking a form of glass right now that is valueless and creating value of it. Would that be fair to say?
I believe that's fair to say.
What's fascinating to me too is with the research and development efforts, Progressive Planet, and the strides you've made in making and the investment. Your team, Dr. Roger Ma, another PhD chemist,
Dr. Doug Brown.
There's a lot of science, but for our podcast listeners, all 12 of you, I think, on the last one. So once again, thanks, Mom and Dad. Every time
It's actually 13.
it's 13 now. But there's a theme with our Building Tech Talk podcast here about this is all about the new economy, the economic potential with science-based material development. The world's largest industry, construction. We've talked about how much cement is consumed, right? So that's why I think having you as our first repeat guest makes so much sense, because we know Progressive Planet and your team, Steve, is leading edge, much like Zetas2. And really, this is the stuff that gets us fired up. Whether it's Zetas2 related or not, it's about this innovation in material science.
I would just like to your point, my vision over the next 20 years, I believe, and I'm paraphrasing a very wise friend of mine of many decades, we are going to see a second industrial revolution. And we have no choice but to build far more sustainably. And we're seeing just the very beginning of this revolution. This will be one of the biggest disruptions in the history of humankind, in my opinion. And we want to be at the forefront of accretive disruption. And I just created that term, accretive disruption. That's where we want to be. We want to do things better, and that requires disruptive practices.
And beyond what we've talked about a lot about the glass concept, but there's a lot of other things happening with Progressive Planet right now, including making a bit of a move to Calgary right now and setting up some new operations. Can you tell us a little bit about what you've got on the go?
Sure. So in April of 2020, we filed a trademark for a sequester as a term to describe the work we're doing in the cement industry. The letter C is the periodic table symbol for carbon. So C-Questor is a play on the word sequester. And we intend to open the Sequester Center of Excellence next door here with expanded research facilities in Calgary. We plan to expand our research staff. And so currently my trip to Calgary here was to meet with contractors and to go over the leasehold improvements to build a wet concrete lab. And we are open for business in the new year. And maybe the next time we do a Tech Talk, it can be in the Sequester Center of Excellence.
That's a great idea.
Fantastic, yeah.
And what was part of the decision to bring that research to Calgary and bring that into this market?
This is a very passionate subject matter for me. Alberta has had a focus on oil and gas for the last 50 years, but Alberta is full of industrious, clever people. And the talent, the pool of talent in Calgary is just phenomenal. And as the Alberta economy segues to more than just oil and gas, we are seeing all sorts of innovation for the cement industry right here in Calgary. There are a lot of scientists that are looking for a change in what they do for a living and for more purpose in what they do. So we liked the talent pool. The real estate is not cost prohibitive like some other cities in Canada. And it's a 6-hour drive from, our operations in BC. So it's, we can get here by driving and not flying. I just recently bought a plug-in hybrid. I need to practice what I preach, and my carbon footprint is dramatically decreased in traveling here in my plug-in hybrid. So that's
Could I suggest next trip bicycling? I might even 6 hours. I'm saying if we really want to get our carbon footprint down.
That's true. You need to give me three days notice of when you want me to show up.
Well, that's generous.
Through Rogers Pass.
If you make it in 3 days, I think we'll all give you a big round of applause when you get here.
I'll donate in your name to a charity.
But you guys are hurting my feeling again.
So, Doug, I just want to toss it to you for a little bit here as we kind of reach the end here. Just a little bit about what inspires you about what's happening right now with. Obviously, you've been so involved in concrete and cement and looking at new options. And what are you seeing as far as now? Do you feel like you're not the only one who's looking into this and looking at the opportunity?
Yeah, absolutely. We're in the midst of the end of COP26, where the world got together to discuss basically the future framework of decarbonization. And, different countries are coming out with their game plan to execute. And a lot of it is on, stopping the use of fossil fuels and heavy emitting industries. And, how do you pivot away from sort of fundamental materials that we need in our society? Particularly in BC, they have a wood first strategy. Well, we can't build large commercial buildings out of wood. So we're not going to live in a world void of cement. And so conversations around using cement or living without it just don't make sense. And so to see companies who are looking to practically look at this problem, I think are almost as important as, concepts of trying to suck it out of the air, because we're not going to live in a world where the Lafarges aren't, cooking cement. So we need to address these in a scientific manner. And the fact that you've taken something like glass that was already being reused, recycled, and found an even better application for it is the exact sort of industriousness that I think we need to start looking at, is the actual accounting of CO2 for these different industries, and seeing how it makes sense to use, what may have been considered waste and valueless ending up in a landfill, and saying hey, why don't we use glass, and we can use 10% less of this material that's, by the way, one of the most carbon intensive materials out there.
Are you guys surprised right now, because you just mentioned COP26? Are you guys surprised that, knowing what you know, that there isn't more discussion around this? That there's so much talk of reducing emissions and things like that, but when something is such a significant contributor to this problem, that there's very little, you do not hear about it at all, other than us talking here. And
I would say, interesting, in my career with, kind of some previous innovative technology companies, construction space, my thought process to that question, Matt, would be follow the money. And there's no doubt, you touched on it, the investment community, maybe not the attendees, the political leaders, or some of the other stakeholders at COP26, but the investment community is definitely paying attention to this. They are paying attention to cement, to Stephen's point about the largest investment funds writing the letter to the large cement companies. We could go on with examples. And so I think that's sort of the canary in the coal mine they know what's coming. They see what the changes. So then I think you'll start to see regulatory. The general public may be a little further down, but we're starting to see more and more articles here in Canada, United States, in Sweden. They're not going to renew the license for Sweden's largest cement facility. And the construction industry is saying, well, wait a sec, how do we build things now? So we'll have to see how that plays out.
Absolutely. Yeah. And to your point, like a lot of our framework around CO2 is a cap and trade, basically. And the cement industry, most of their production is exempt from the carbon tax currently in the current framework.
In Canada.
In Canada. And so basically they can't expand production without paying the tax. And if we continue to, 9-10 billion people on the earth, that's not realistic. But cement currently has a market value, and Steve, correct me if I'm wrong, of around $200 a ton. And it produces a ton of CO2, which in this country in 2030 is set to have a value of $170 a ton. So that's a 200% increase essentially on the value of cement. And so this is an industry that's kind of seeing the writing on the wall, so to speak, a little bit, and understands that there needs to be a huge, monumental leap forward in how we treat CO2, or they're going to experience a very significant price increase.
So one of the buzzwords, Matt, that is being thrown about in healthy proportions right now is ESG, environmental and social governance. And the millennials, Gen Zs, are increasingly purpose-driven investors. Now, yes, most of the money is controlled by older generations, but there is a paradigm shift in the way people invest. And one of the metrics is to observe what are your ESG policies. And we internally have committed to having a comprehensive list of ESG policies by June 30th of 2022 as our internal goal. We know we're doing a bunch of very incredible stuff for the environment, but we need to document and have a very transparent set of ESG policies, and we are working on that as we speak.
Well, I think that's going to be when you're our next repeat guest and we get to catch up with you again. I think there's going to be so much more to hear about. And you're moving so fast that I think it's going to be really exciting to keep track of what Progressive Planet is doing. So thank you, Stephen, for joining us.
Thank you.
And as always, subscribe, like. We're on Apple Podcasts and Spotify. So be sure to subscribe and leave a comment if you can as well. It really helps us out. So until next time, thanks, gentlemen.
Thank you.
Thanks, Steve.